I'm delighted to be here again in the South-South Sustainability Forum of this year. And Kinchi had actually said that please speak on hope and resilience and resistance. And Jayati actually has given a clear context of number one, which says why hope is important, but also showing how hopeless the situation has been for all of us in India in the last few years, especially those who are seeking the alternative. But nonetheless, I'm going to actually look for the cracks where the light gets in, to quote Leonard Cohen. And the reason is because documents and narratives of the state do not record people's resilience and resistance, unless it is leads to the success of state power. Now, just as history was written by men, for men, and about men until women started challenging it, and colonial history was written by victors of race until decolonization discourses began, so also I believe this SSF and what we do contributes to the recording of resistance, of discourses, and of people's histories. Now, in last year's SSF, we had spoken very broadly of what Jayati did to show neoliberal globalization and the dominant policies which undermine ecology, increase political and economic centralization, increase unemployment, degradation, often resort to myths in place of science, increase militarization. And all this has been deepened by COVID. But simultaneously, I would say there has been amazing resistance world over, but also in India. And the challenges have come in different ways. And some places they have been on a path of success, whereas in others they are fragmented. And what I'm going to try and do also is to show where resistance has been more successful than other places. Now, in the pandemic, as Jayati already showed, in the first wave, over 700,000 labor, mostly men, but women and children, walked to their villages. And wherever you saw some hope, it was from civil society and NGOs or from state governments who were making community canteens, assisting people, helping each other. And that is how this survival happened. In the second wave, where it was extremely devastating, the kind of pandemic, and very harsh, with hundreds of thousands of deaths, but also oxygen shortages, hospital shortages. Again, it was people who came up to help each other. Now, here I want to make one distinction. This pandemic, the second wave, hit primarily, initially, the towns where there are large amounts of middle class and lower middle class, upper class, etc. And everyone was hit uniformly. The pandemic, unlike our government or our class system, did not distinguish, even though people distinguished. Initially, they said, it was one Muslim gathering, Jamaat, which led to it, etc. But here, it was just a wave, and people had to help each other. Young people set up apps and online kind of systems telling people where oxygen would be available, which hospital to go to. So again, it was people who assisted each other. So again, it seems like a symbol of hope. But what I want to say is, for example, in the state of Uttar Pradesh, when people were helping each other, the state government, they actually put first information reports and threatened people with imprisonment if they cried out for help on the social media. So obsessed were they by perception management, that everything is okay, we are great and doing well. But that didn't work. And even the Allahabad High Court of the state of Uttar Pradesh, they stated, and in quotes, it is a shame that while the government knew of the magnitude of the second wave, it never planned things in advance. So even, sometimes many of us had lost hope in the judiciary, because as institutions were collapsing, as democracy has been hollowed out to such an extent in the last 7 years, but somewhere, some of the judicial institutions in judiciary also intervened and said to the state governments, you have to help your citizens. So, but the question of how do you assess this as a social movement is that, will this pandemic lead to a movement for public health? Unlikely. Why? Because civil society or the social groups which mobilized it did it like social work and welfare, not as a political movement. The support was fragmented, and the state was able to maintain its own narrative to date of vaccinations, etc., many examples of which Jayati already gave, so I will not go into it. The second social movement or resistance that I'm going to take up is that of the environmental movement. Now in India, unlike in the West, the environmental movement is present. It's a long movement. It has a long history, but it doesn't have the kind of mass that an environmental movement would need in a country like India to be a success. A large number of wonderful young people and environmentalists and others are committed to it, but they get fragmented, and the state deals down with them in a very heavy way. For example, in one village in Tamil Nadu, the villagers protested against this Kudunkalam village. They protested against the proposed nuclear plant. 9,000 people in that one village were charged with sedition. And those cases go on till today. So you can imagine if 9,000 poor people who did not want a nuclear plant and rose up against it, and they are charged with anti-state activities. Sedition is that you're a traitor. But still that movement continued, but people were then diverted to fighting these cases. And the Kudunkulam nuclear plant came up. Similarly, when we do the farmers' movement, at that time, a young environmental activist from Bangalore, Disha, she edited a small kind of social media kit for Greta Thunberg. And lo and behold, she was kidnapped from her home in Bangalore, brought to Delhi. She's 21 years old and arrested for for put up this so-called toolkit on the issue of environment. Ultimately, the judiciary freed her, but she's facing cases, but she continues to go for the Fridays for protest and other such things. So what I'm arguing is that this movement, again, there is resistance, there is resilience, but to be actually effective, it has to become a mass movement. The third issue which I'm taking up are two issues. One about the CAA, that is the Citizenship Amendment Act, which was an act placed by this Hindutva government, which discriminated of who to give citizenship to. And while it was targeting refugees who'd been coming into India for, ever since independence, the act said that those who were Hindu refugees, they would get citizenship, but the Muslims would have to show their papers and they could be interned or thrown out. Now, where would you throw out? And there are 18 million Muslims in India, and they got so, tense and shaken. And for the first time, they didn't feel that they were part of India, and they were all the Muslims in India have been part of the national movement, etc. But now there were lynchings on the basis of what they ate, on personal preferences, on their clothing, etc. So there was this underlying communal tension, and to resist this, a group of fairly senior women, that is, they call themselves the grandmothers of Jamia, they started a protest near the university in Jamia Nagar, where a lot of Muslims live. And this protest got a lot of steam. They just sat there day and night and refused to move. And the government, which is so harsh, could do nothing about it. They couldn't move these hundreds of women. It was led by women. There were every attempt to call them anti-national, to say that men were hiding behind these women, but these women held on. Sadly, COVID intervened and they had to lift their movement. But at the same time, this CAA law has been put on the back burner primarily because of COVID. But every time there's an election, the Home Minister threatens to bring it up because it polarizes. It polarizes the Hindus and the Muslims. But a lot of the Hindus, the secular people, the university students back the CAA in a big way. So I would consider that a successful movement. Of course, this was also the time when Donald Trump came to India, and there were communal riots in Northeast Delhi, and a large number of people who were involved in the protest, young people, including students from our university, 2 young women and a young man who had nothing to do with the communal rioting, were put into jail for over a year. One of them is still there, whereas the 2 girls have just been released. But the most amazing movement, which gives one hope and resilience, is really the Indian farmers' movement. And it is the most significant of all social movements and civil society resilience so far. Now, I will very briefly go into why it happened. In September 2020, the BJP government, during the COVID pandemic, they passed 3 laws despite opposition by farmers, trade unions, opposition parties. And these laws were intent of giving the big corporates a complete access to farm produce, and in fact, to land. It would have led to land alienation in a big way. These laws generated huge fear and anger amongst, first, the largely fragmented Indian farmer community, and this gradually turned into a mass movement. 2 months after these laws were passed, in November 2020, farmers, first from the state of Punjab, came to Delhi and they launched the Delhi Chalo movement. Let's go to Delhi. Of course, they mobilized greatly in village after village in Punjab. Before they came to Delhi, they gathered mass support of their own community. It wasn't just unplanned. And they came for a non-stop, day and night, month after month sit-in at the borders of the capital. They closed the borders of Delhi. In the sense, they allowed traffic to pass, but they settled on 2 or 3 of the borders, Tikri, Singhu, and I won't go into the names, it's complicated. And this continues to date, November 2020 till date. Now, the farmers' movement is the longest, the largest, and most peaceful movement in contemporary times internationally. This movement is, I believe, a true inheritor of the anti-colonial freedom struggle of India. Now, the hurdles before the farmers were similar to that of any movement in the recent times. And let me tell you very quickly what these hurdles are, and you could understand it. 1, The nature of Indian agrarian structure is dominated by small farm holdings and therefore very difficult for collective thinking or connecting, which makes this the first major hurdle of the movement. But that's so for the environmentalists, for the women's movement. They're all fragmented. But here, it's especially different and fragmented across the millions of acres of land across India. So it's very fragmented. Two, the majoritarian, all-powerful Indian government, known to ruthlessly crush dissent. And you saw how they crushed the dissent of the CAA, the environmentalists, the earlier trade union movements, the women's movement. They've all been crushed, but they've risen again. But this movement refused to get crushed. Three, a slavish national mainstream media that is the voice of the government. This media, including the television media, especially, they blacked out the farmers' movement. In fact, night after night on television channels, they would call people and show that either this movement was just restricted to one region, that is Punjab, whereas with every passing day, it moved out of Punjab to Haryana, to Western UP, to Rajasthan. People came from Kerala, from Tamil Nadu, from Maharashtra, walking in tempos to join it. But they kept saying that this is a secessionist movement because it was minorities, Punjabi Sikhs who led it. They said that it was seditious. They said it was anti-national. Every possible slur was put on it, not just by the government, by government spokespersons, of course, but by the television channels, and very subtly by the mainstream media also. Four, a huge IT cell of the ruling party that creates a narrative and trolls people in the worst possible way. And I think everyone world over knows that this social media trolling is not just words, it's also actionable. It leads to action. It leads to harassment. It leads to mental agony. And this is what was happening. Five, a slow judicial process where justice is delayed. So when cases are lodged, as Jayati said, every possible enforcement directive, IT, examining where are the sources of funding coming for the farmers. That was another major hurdle. Six, the fragmented peasantry, which is divided on the basis of caste, class, religion, gender, and region. There is no one peasantry in India. You would have different issues with the Punjabis, and within that also, there's a landless labor, there's a landed peasantry, there is the faraway landlord, there are the migrant labor who come at this time of season. But lo and behold, somehow they all came together. And when I talk about the successes, I'll talk about this more, because my argument is that this has led to a change in some kind of social structure also. It's leading to a slow evolution, a change in social structure, and that is what a major social movement can do. Seventh hurdle was the COVID pandemic. In the middle of this COVID pandemic, you had these farmers who stayed there day and night. There was no social distancing, no physical distancing. They were clubbed together. It was at 8, of course, was a terrible Delhi cold winter. No access. They were living in tents. They were living on their trolleys. And day and night, over 100 died. They all said, not of COVID. Maybe they denied it. Maybe it was there. But somehow the Punjabi farmer, the Haryanvi farmer, and other farmers bore this brunt also. 10 was, of course, the Indian government tried every trick of the trade. Besides the narrative, they disconnected the electricity. They disconnected water. They removed toilet facilities. So for thousands of people sitting there, there were no toilets. It was just unbearable. And they tried every trick to delegitimize this. But nonetheless, the farmers stood their ground. So now, therefore, I come to my next point. That is, why is it that this movement has been so far a success and the farmers have not gone back even an inch? One, because of their non-violent and mass resistance. This gives a lot of legitimacy to a movement, nationally and internationally. They were willing to bear this, all the hurt on their bodies, but they did not give in to any form of violence. In fact, when one or two times, a couple of their cadres tried to break barriers and plant a flag on Independence Day or Republic Day, etc., they castigated that cadre and said, no, you have to go according to rules, you have to go according to police permission. So this was a major, major victory. Their mass that they had behind them, the hundreds and thousands and millions of people behind them, and second, their non-violence. Two, there were networks which had ended, which were old, but they were rebuilt. Farmers' networks, unions, everyone using their little contacts to build networks so they could build the community support across regions. Three, the synergy between the leadership and the mass of people. The leadership was not populist. Sometimes a mass of people might have been, their mass support might have been fed up, but they contained them and said, wait, if you agitate and go beyond rules, we will withdraw the agitation. So everyone listened to this leadership. This leadership is not a known leadership. It has no one from a known political party. It's a completely grassroots leadership. Many of them cannot speak in English and they find it difficult to address the English television media. Four, the grassroots support across caste, gender, and community. They had a Women's Day march. They had women driving tractors, the kind of support which came from each village of these states who took turns to harvest the land when the men were not there. So this is why I'm arguing there was a change in caste relations, because the lowest caste in Punjab stood by the upper caste. It became one Sikh community, one Haryanvi community, Haryanvis and Sikhs, Western UP, Rajasthan, etc. Fifth, very important, was the support from alternative sources, especially the Sikh Gurdwaras. Now, the Sikh temples, as everyone in the world knows, are very rich places of community worship. And they gave the farmers complete support and sanction. And it was not just Sikh Gurdwaras here, it was Sikh Gurdwaras from world over, mobilized their resources and said, we can support this movement for 3 years. They told the Modi government, do what you want. When the Modi government and their channels are such that when the government tried to use the tax authorities, they could not find the clue of a single illegal transaction or foreign funding in any way which was misused. They could not. They tried for months and months, but they have not been able to do that. So this was, they provided food, shelter, etc. 6, civil society, trade unions, women's group, young activists, and the diaspora from abroad, especially the Punjabi diaspora from abroad, came in hundreds of ways. There were over 100 brilliant songs written. A newspaper called Trolley Times started from the trolleys of that movement, coming out every second day. Online, huge, and 7, also social media. It countered the government IT and the party media cells. The social media of young people who were supporting the farmers. They flooded the social media with their own messages, contrary to what was being done by the state. 7, the foreign media played a great role in this. The alternate media, the foreign media, whether it was BBC or The Economist, New York Times, Washington Post, they sent their reporters and they covered this day and night. And there were songs in Punjabi and in Haryanvi which said, okay, our media is not covering it, we are watching BBC, we don't care. So this is how it became a kind of a unstoppable. So therefore, the alternate media, which has developed in India the last few years, media like the print, the Wire, the Citizen, anyone who wants information on India today should read this alternate media. The online papers, not on the mainstream, but Wire, Citizen, Scroll, Print, Quint. There are many of those, and in regional languages. They are really interesting. It's really hard for them. They're underfunded, but they're carrying on, and they use all their resources to support the farmers. So really then, just in terms of conclusion, I would say the hope and success of resilience is based on, and this was my lessons from the farmers movement, is based on the success and usefulness of coalitions. The kind of coalition that was built on. And a coalition is always on a lowest common denominator, minimum program where you have to be flexible, you have to give some and take some. So the coalition that the farmers built was amazing. And mind you, they took up the cases of the CAA. They announced that the government should stop sedition cases, that dissenters should be freed. They said that, but of course they focused on the farmers' issue. But it's not that they, forgot the others. 2, linking with pre-existing networks. There's a great attempt for these networks to die down when there's no movement, but they can be revived, and they do revive these got revived and strengthened. 3, the innovative use of social media where songs, poems, art were mobilized. 4, a shared understanding of the leadership of not stepping back until that 1-point agenda of removing these farm laws came to be. Even the Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court tried to tell the farmers, we'll set up a committee, you send your representatives, the government tried, the parliament tried, but they said no. No talks, only roll back the laws completely. The government offered them, it's not that they didn't, that we will go clause by clause of these 3 laws, but they refused. They said, roll back completely. You didn't consult us, now it's too late, roll back the laws. And so that's how it is today. Even today in the papers, I read that thousands of farmers, now that the second wave is actually declining, the farmers are coming right back. They have support. I read today that they said that they had enough wheat to survive for 3 years on the roads of Delhi. So they are also playing the psycho ops, as you call it, telling the government we are not going back. And they know that the police and the army will not fire on thousands. They can fire on a few. They can put seditions on a few university students who are saying, more democracy, but they can't fire on let's say 15,000 farmers who are sitting there, who have another 200,000 backing them in each state. So this is what gives us hope and resilience, and I hope it gives some hope and resilience to all of us in Asia and the Third World. Thank you very much.